saying a word of thanks to St. Andrews for the invitation, the opportunity to share a few thoughts today on the experience of our trip and the great opportunity it was, the great fellowship we enjoyed, and what we hope will be something of what comes of this adventure for the church. There is a somewhat subtitle-ish heading for what I'm sharing with you this afternoon, and that subtitle is, Why Would the Moderator of General Assembly Go to Israel-Palestine? And before I talk specifically about Israel-Palestine, I want to spend a couple minutes actually talking about that and responding to that question, because I think there's something interesting in the context of how this happened. That is, it was not the original plan to go there. Typically, the moderator of our General Assembly goes to a place where we have official partnerships or staff on the ground somewhere in the world. And it was agreed in May, in anticipation of the Assembly, that that location, that place where we have a partnership and a historic one, would be India, and that there would be extensive travel in this particular moderatorial trip to India. But this year's Assembly, based on previous learnings and discussion and sharing at committee levels and beyond, had chosen to highlight many of the issues facing Christians in the Middle East as part of its Tuesday evening educational component in lieu of a regular sitting or a sederent. Whoops, I said a Latin word. There was much interest in these seminars, much sharing, excellent discussion as various presenters talked about the context of Christianity in the Middle East. And, as Bob mentioned, with the recommendation regarding the adoption of our proposed response to the Kairos Palestine Document, came further discussion in light of the plight of Palestinian Christians, something we don't necessarily hear an awful lot about, certainly not in the Western press. The commissioner, actually a former moderator, then raised in the Assembly the question of whether the moderator might go instead to Israel-Palestine instead of already the prearranged trip to India. This is a somewhat unusual request because I think historically the pattern is set that the moderator, in consultation with national staff, determines a location in advance, as we did. My response to the invitation or the suggestion to consider going was that I was quite open to it because of all the aforementioned reasons in terms of what's happening there, but sympathetic to the fact that we had made preliminary arrangements. Our good friend Dr. Ron Wallace of International Ministries assured the Assembly that arrangements were made, but nothing we couldn't weasel our way out of. And so I suppose we did, and thanks to Ron for doing that. And then subsequently, in consultation with Karen and with national staff, we adopted the approach to definitely make the trip to Israel-Palestine. Given the shifting ground for Palestinian Christians and the higher than usual interest in the plight of this faith community, it was also proposed that we would look at inviting a larger circle of participants. Typically the moderator's trip is moderator and spouse, perhaps a staff person or so, and off they go. This was a proposal to broaden the impact of the returning group so that the larger church and community could benefit more so from many voices having shared the experience. This is a change in practice. Change. We did. We have today one small example of the benefit of that through this particular Advent series and the sharing of numerous voices who've had this experience. So let me return now to one very significant point, and that is the invitation to come. Much of the Assembly's interest and the Assembly's willingness to encourage this particular destination for the moderator's tour came, as we know, at the request of the signatories to the Kairos Palestine Document, who simply yet profoundly asked any and all readers of that document to come and see for yourselves. And I must say, in our experience there, and in meeting with so many people, and in dining with many, and sharing experiences with so many, we heard a common theme of, we are so thrilled that you've come. We know it's not easy to do this sort of thing from so far away, and to bring a group like this. We are so pleased that you have made this effort to come and see for yourselves. Because this is the cradle of our faith, and there is much to experience outside of what we hear in the popular media. I think the other important piece around this shift was the sense of the current church, our contemporary church, being able to act somewhat swiftly. We traditionally and quickly and easily point to the church and say it is a slow-moving, monolithic kind of structure. And perhaps in years past, it might have been considered inappropriate to shift an original plan for one destination to another. It's something we did quite quickly on the floor of assembly and in the days that followed, and I think that's a good sign of a church trying to be responsive to real human needs. One of the reasons why it was never considered in the first place to go to Israel-Palestine is because it's not a place where we actually have staff on the ground or cemented partnerships. We have many friendships and we support many organizations who do important and good work in Israel-Palestine, but not like, say, our relationships in India or Malawi or Taiwan, where there are staff that represent or came from our Canadian church and are sharing in specific staffing ministries. One of the things that I hope might come out of our experience is the possibility of some kind of a stronger staff relationship, staffing connection in Palestine in the future, but only time and appropriate resources of personnel and expertise will tell if that's a possibility. So, ultimately, why did the moderator and his entourage go to Israel-Palestine, or what did they want us to see? Perhaps is another way to ask the question. They wanted us to see a very rapidly deteriorating society for Palestinian Christians, a very marginalized community, in a place where Christians from the earliest days of the adoption of Christian faith have lived and thrived. And because of the escalating pressures of the Israeli emphasis on security at every turn, many Palestinians are simply leaving, trying to find any possible way to emigrate away. Sadly, but understandably. Sadly, because it means that this vibrant Christian faith community may evolve into something that leaves behind it only those who are watching over sacred shrines, but no living, empowered faith community around it. They live in a context in which they feel the impact of their shrinking community. They struggle to maintain high values of education, healthcare, meaningful work, and a civil society. All these things are being rapidly eroded. Palestinians are daily harassed and abused and treated with indignities that are simply not allowable under international law, yet it continues to persist because of, frankly, the power of the Jewish and Zionist lobbies both in America and, frankly, all around the world, including Canada. And it escapes the eye of the international media, or worse, perhaps it's ignored and intentionally devalued. So Palestinians are looking to the rest of the world to come to their aid in this battle, which they cannot win on their own. They do not have the influence, the power, the resources to do so. Palestinians seek to live in peace within their own land, and they accept the right of Israelis, and when I say they, I mean the broad community of Palestinians, accept the right of Israelis to live with a secure peace within their own borders as well. But the aggressive practices of the Israeli government continue to rob Palestinians of their land, their future, their commerce, and their dignity. We went there to see this for ourselves, because the image that many of us live with in the West is of a nation of terrorists who want only to make life unbearable for Israelis. And this is preposterously untrue. Palestinians are in fact not a terrorist nation, but a terrorized nation, as we heard them say. Too many uncritical, simplistic level Christians around the world believe that Israel's claim as God's chosen people allows them to do virtually anything under the guise of security in Israel-Palestine to protect their land. And we need to be those voices around the world who stand up for the people of Palestine, who are entitled to every right to occupy the land of their heritage and to be able to do so in a secure, dignified manner without threat of occupation or worse. So we have sought to respond by being there and to share the story and to share steps of what to do next. Thank you.
It's also my pleasure to be here with you today and to share some of my own reflections and in many ways to let none of us off the hook in terms of communicating and shedding light on what is really going on in the Middle East and particularly where we traveled. I had the opportunity to go as the wife of, and so off I went trekking on this, but in actual fact, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit globally. I had the privilege of being convener of PWS&D, Presbyterian World Service and Development Agency, for about 6 years. So I have gone to the remotest villages and I have seen the poorest of the poor. I've held dying children in my arms as they're dying of starvation, and I have come home from those trips feeling very broken at the kind of suffering that people experience. So you might think that the trip to the Middle East might be a very different experience, but I can share with you that I came home with a broken heart nonetheless. To watch the kind of daily degradation and humiliation that people face, and to realize that we have not been exposed to it. And so today I'm going to plead with all of you to help us in sharing light, to help people to understand the truth and what is really going on. As Rick mentioned, Bishop Shakur said to us, you know, everyone sees us as the terrorists, but in actual fact we're the terrorized. And that was our experience. Not a party line that was dished out to us, but rather daily we watched as people were treated poorly and as people were humiliated over and over again. And so I think it falls to all of us, not just the 8 of us that went to this trip, but all of us that are listening to this message. It's important for us to continue to go out there and correct the message and to tell the truth as we've experienced it. I watched a video just after I came home, and this video was this beautiful enticement to come and see the Holy Land. And so it swooped in and the cameras came over and we saw the walls, the old walls of Jerusalem. We saw all the beautiful sights, but not once in this entire video did we see the real wall that's going up. This horrible wall that stands 20 feet tall and travels for miles, separating one set of people from another, and in containing people, Palestinians, almost in very large cages, where permits are required to go to your own land, where people have to get permission to enter out into the next community, where people are regularly strip searched and x-rayed, and they face that kind of humiliation day in and day out. That's the kind of truth that we need to tell, not the wonderful, fanciful description of the Holy Land. Yes, it is beautiful, but there is this underside of the treatment of Palestinians that we need to talk about. I had a fellow in my congregation that went to the Holy Land just after I returned home, and so I said to him, whatever you do, make sure you peel off of the trip and see the real story. And so that's what he did. They went to Bethlehem, which of course is a Palestinian area, and of course when you're on these organized tours, they all get shepherded, I use that term deliberately, shepherded into these tourist shops, and of course you're to buy your manger scenes and so on, which we did. But he peeled off, and it took no time at all to see the real wall, to see the kind of separation. And he said to me, well, you know, they wouldn't let our Jewish tour guide into the area. And I said, well, you know that it's the Jewish authorities that are not giving that permission, not the Palestinians. So wherever we can, I think all of us are called on to know the truth and to experience it. And we can give you websites of a variety of different groups that we met with. Choose one and simply go regularly into that website and see the truth for what it is, not what we begin to experience in the press. I bet you not one of you heard about 5 children being rushed to the hospital because soldiers opened up on them. I bet you didn't find that anywhere in our newspapers, but we experienced it directly. It's not something that was made up. It was something that happened in Hebron the day that we were there. And I've had a couple of people now that have been on the speaker trail, and they say, well, I guess there's just two opinions about the Holy Land. And I have to try and graciously respond to that, to say, no, there aren't just two opinions about the Holy Land. And it isn't just about the Jews or the Palestinians. For us as Christians, it's about seeing the truth, crying out for justice wherever we see injustice happening. So it's not being about pro-one or pro-another. It's about wanting to pursue the rights of all human beings to be treated with dignity and with grace. And so anytime we hear of those stories, we need to be careful that we correct them and that we help people to understand that it is a very complex area and it isn't as simple as two people being at war with one another. And I've heard that so many times since I've come home. I think the other thing we really have to do as well, and all of us can do that, is to break down some of the stereotypes that we have. You know, when I first started working in the church, I felt like I carried the load for all women. And I got this sense that all we women were supposed to think alike and act alike and do alike. Otherwise, somehow we might have some sort of impact on womanhood in general. And it's the same with Palestinians. We can't assume they all think alike, that they're all terrorists or they all are not. All of those kinds of things we have to learn and understand that people are people and they have all kinds of varying opinions about what the solutions might be for the future. And to respect that and recognize that they are people of diverse thought and diverse solutions, and we need to give them that kind of satisfaction. And also the Islamophobia was a word I hadn't used until I went to the Middle East. But we met so many people, including Muslims, who are faithful, who are kind and generous and hospitable, Muslims that were Palestinians who were so welcoming to us as Christians. And again, we just have those stereotypes that we build up where we think they're all like that, they're all terrorists, they're all wanting to do in people. And unfortunately, we carry those kinds of assumptions with us. So it's important for us to let go of those kinds of stereotypes. And you know, I think another really critical thing that we need to do as Christians here, as we're out and about, is to allow for the grace of people to make mistakes. You know, what happened 25 years ago isn't necessarily something that should define who we are today. So there may have been a time when the Palestinians went through a violent period in their frustration to know how to respond to the kind of horrors that were going on around them and to them. And I have to tell you, as I said to people on the bus, and I managed to make it home even having said this, I was so angry by what I was experiencing. In a 10-day period, I wanted to throw a bomb. I wanted to commit acts of violence. I was so frustrated with how people were being treated. So it's important for us to realize that we mature, we change, our attitudes are different. So even if you have history from 20 years ago, it doesn't apply anymore. People have changed and moved on, and people have come to different kinds of solutions in our contemporary day. And as Rick was sharing earlier, we really have to shed our religious blinders. There's a real danger that we can support a Jewish position by virtue of sharing a heritage with them. And we have to be so careful that we don't provide a blind loyalty that does not shed the blinders of what really is going on. You know, there are many, many secular Jews. There are many who aren't practicing. There are many who have very different opinions. So again, to clump all the Jews together in one package is to be unfair to them. And it's important that we understand their reality as well. It was interesting that one person said, you know, why is it that we seem to turn such a blind eye? Why is it that we really don't want to hear the truth? And that's been my experience as I've come home. There have been people who have prickled as they've heard about it. They're quick to want to defend the Jewish population. And again, don't hear me being pro or anti, it's just what we experienced. And one person suggested to us, I think, a helpful line. And that was that we are still working through atonement as Christians and as people, as we watched a Holocaust unfold and the horrors to us that in some ways we allowed that to happen. And there's a danger in the guilt that comes from that we choose to remain blind now because we do not want to be engaged and be hurtful yet again. But the tragedy is that we are harming. We are harming by not knowing the truth and not weighing in. And I think it's important for us to hear loud and clear that degradation and humiliation and requiring people to get permits to go to their own land, to get permits to visit family because they happen to be on the other side of the wall, to have to do that on a daily basis is an act of violence. It's like when we say that abused women aren't abused because they don't have the bruises. These people, Palestinians, are bruised daily. Not physically, although sometimes that happens, but just that slow demeaning that happens to a population when they have to go through gates and checks and x-rays and internal kinds of examinations. We talked to a priest who went through x-rays, and they invited him on several occasions to strip down to his skin, including taking off his shoes. And one day he had it. He said, "I will no longer do it. I have a good book with me, and if it takes you a month to let me go, then that's how long I'll wait. But I will not take off my clothes one more time." We underestimate what that does to a people when they go through those kinds of experiences. And some would even suggest that it is a strategy that is quite bright. It's just slow, it's incremental, but it's daily. To eat away at a people, some suggest it might even be ethnic cleansing. Whether we agree with that or not, the reality is that people are facing this kind of pain all the time. So it's important for us not to leave this place and say, "Oh, wasn't that interesting to hear those people from St. Andrews?" But to leave this place, now that you hear, to know that you too have a responsibility. Not just the 8 of us who have seen it directly, but to hear about this and then to not do anything, to not share the word, is a responsibility that we cannot avoid. We are to share light. We are to go out and break the darkness. And as we continue to clarify what's really going on, then I believe there's all the hope in the world. Because as we went there were times where I found I just wanted to throw my arms up in despair. It's so complex, it's so deeply rooted, it's so historical that there's that sense that you feel like there's no way this can be turned around. But if you have those moments, then just remember there was another wall that came down. And I, in my lifetime, have seen apartheid dismantled. I have watched the emancipation of blacks in the US. It is possible if we all work for it, if we all continue to shed light where we can. So that's a challenge for us directly as we saw it firsthand, but for all of you as you hear the realities of what's happening in the Middle East. Share the truth, and ultimately a people will be set free.